Penguin Random House Audio presents Possible Minds, 25 Ways of Looking at AI, edited by John Brockman, read for you by Jason Culp, Rob Shapiro, Vikas Adam, Will Damron, and Kathleen McInerney. Introduction on the Promise and Peril of AI. Artificial intelligence is today's story, the story behind all other stories. It is the second coming and the apocalypse at the same time, good AI versus evil AI. This book comes out of an ongoing conversation with a number of important thinkers, both in the world of AI and beyond it, about what AI is and what it means. Called the Possible Minds Project, this conversation began in earnest in September 2016 in a meeting at the Grace Mayflower Inn and Spa in Washington, Connecticut, with some of the book's contributors. What quickly emerged from that first meeting is that the excitement and fear in the wider culture surrounding AI now has an analog in the way Norbert Wiener's ideas regarding cybernetics worked their way through the culture, particularly in the 1960s, as artists began to incorporate thinking about new technologies into their work. I witnessed the impact of those ideas at close hand. Indeed, it's not too much to say they set me off on my life's path. With the advent of the digital era beginning in the early 1970s, people stopped talking about Wiener, but today, his cybernetic idea has been so widely adopted that it's internalized to the point where it no longer needs a name. It's everywhere, it's in the air, and it's a fitting place to begin. New technologies equals new perceptions. Before AI, there was cybernetics, the idea of automatic, self-regulating control laid out in Norbert Wiener's foundational text of 1948. I can date my own serious exposure to it to 1966, when the composer John Cage invited me and 4 or 5 other young arts people to join him for a series of dinners, an ongoing seminar about media, communications, art, music, and philosophy that focused on Cage's interest in the ideas of Wiener, Claude Shannon, and Marshall McLuhan, all of whom had currency in the New York art circles in which I was then moving. In particular, Cage had picked up on McLuhan's idea that by inventing electronic technologies, we had externalized our central nervous system, that is, our minds, and that we now had to presume that there's only one mind, the one we all share. Ideas of this nature were beginning to be of great interest to the artists I was working with in New York at the Filmmakers Cinematheque, where I was program manager for a series of multimedia productions called the New Cinema One, also known as the Expanded Cinema Festival, under the auspices of avant-garde filmmaker and impresario Jonas Mekas. They included visual artists Klaus Oldenburg, Robert Rauschenberg, Andy Warhol, and Robert Whitman, kinetic artists Charlotte Moorman and Namjoon Paik, happenings artists Alan Capro and Carolee Schneeman, dancer Trisha Brown, filmmakers Jack Smith, Stan Vanderbeek, Ed Emshwiller, and the Kuchar brothers, avant-garde dramatist Ken Dewey, poet Gerd Stern and the USCO group, minimalist musicians Lamont Young and Terry Riley, and through Warhol, the music group The Velvet Underground. Many of these people were reading Wiener, and cybernetics was in the air. It was at one of these dinners that Cage reached into his briefcase and took out a copy of Cybernetics and handed it to me, saying, "This is for you." During the festival, I received an unexpected phone call from Wiener's colleague, Arthur K. Solomon, head of Harvard's graduate program in biophysics. Wiener had died the year before, and Solomon's and Wiener's other close colleagues at MIT and Harvard had been reading about the Expanded Cinema Festival in the New York Times and were intrigued by the connection to Wiener's work. Solomon invited me to bring some of the artists up to Cambridge to meet with him and a group that included MIT sensory communications researcher Walter Rosenbleeth, Harvard applied mathematician Anthony Oettinger, and MIT engineer Harold Doc Edgerton, inventor of the strobe light. Like many other art meets science situations I've been involved in since, the two-day event was an informed failure, ships passing in the night. But I took it all on board, and the event was consequential in some interesting ways, one of which came from the fact that they took us to see the computer. Computers were a rarity back then. At least none of us on the visit had ever seen one. We were ushered into a large space on the MIT campus, in the middle of which there was a cold room, raised off the floor and enclosed in glass, in which technicians wearing white lab coats, scarves, and gloves were busy collating punch cards coming through an enormous machine. When I approached, the steam from my breath fogged up the window into the cold room. Wiping it off, I saw the computer. I fell in love. Later, in the fall of 1967, I went to Menlo Park to spend time with Stuart Brand, whom I had met in New York in 1965 when he was a satellite member of the USCO group of artists. Now, with his wife Lois, a mathematician, he was preparing the first edition of the Whole Earth Catalog for publication. While Lois and the team did the heavy lifting on the final mechanicals for WEC, Stuart and I sat together in a corner for 2 days, reading, underlining, and annotating the same paperback copy of Cybernetics that Cage had handed to me the year before, and debating Wiener's ideas. Inspired by this set of ideas, I began to develop a theme, a mantra of sorts, that has informed my endeavors since. New technologies equals new perceptions. Inspired by communications theorist Marshall McLuhan, architect-designer Buckminster Fuller, futurist John McHale, and cultural anthropologists Edward T. Ned Hall and Edmund Carpenter, I started reading avidly in the fields of information theory, cybernetics, and systems theory. McLuhan suggested I read biologist J.Z. Young's Doubt and Certainty in Science, in which he said that we create tools and we mold ourselves through our use of them. The other text he recommended was Warren Weaver and Claude Shannon's 1949 paper, Recent Contributions to the Mathematical Theory of Communication, which begins, "The word communication will be used here in a very broad sense to include all of the procedures by which one mind may affect another. This, of course, involves not only written and oral speech, but also music, the pictorial arts, the theater, the ballet, and in fact, all human behavior." Who knew that within 2 decades of that moment we would begin to recognize the brain as a computer? And in the next 2 decades, as we built our computers into the Internet, that we would begin to realize that the brain is not a computer but a network of computers? Certainly not Wiener, a specialist in analog feedback circuits designed to control machines, nor the artists, nor, least of all, myself. We must cease to kiss the whip that lashes us. 2 years after Cybernetics, in 1950, Norbert Wiener published The Human Use of Human Beings, a deeper story in which he expressed his concerns about the runaway commercial exploitation and other unforeseen consequences of the new technologies of control. I didn't read The Human Use of Human Beings until the spring of 2016, when I picked up my copy, a first edition, which was sitting in my library next to Cybernetics. What shocked me was the realization of just how prescient Wiener was in 1950 about what's going on today. Although the first edition was a major bestseller, and indeed jump-started an important conversation, under pressure from his peers, Wiener brought out a revised and milder edition in 1954, from which the original concluding chapter, Voices of Rigidity, is conspicuously absent.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?